Hey gamers, this is Liz Davidson from Beyond Solitaire, and this week on my podcast, I have a very special guest, Jess Cassady. How are you doing today, Jess?
I am doing great. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's good to have you on.
Good
So,
to be here.
Jess, you are like the person behind many games, but there are a lot of great games out there, and you're the woman behind the scenes. So, give us a quick overview of some of the tasks that you do in the gaming industry.
Oh, let's see. Yeah, I like to hide. I like to be behind things and no one knows I'm there. That's my MO for sure. So I started in the hobby at Artana Games and I was managing their booths, going to conventions, doing stuff like that. But as small publishing goes, that you end up wearing a ton of different hats. So I took on marketing for them and then started looking at direct to retail and how that worked and what were some secret best practices for promoting your games in retail and getting them picked up in bigger numbers by distribution. And then Kickstarters, let's run those and see how that goes as well. And then playtesting games that were coming out, getting them looked at cons, maybe taking pitches for new games that might get picked up by Artana, going to speed dating for designers and publishers, which is a lot of fun. Judging at certain, Cardboard Edison, things like that, giving some judging panel, volunteer work hours as well. And then I had a game come in my lap that needed some development. So I took it in that direction too.
Yeah, so this is where I was going to steer you. It's true. One of the things that you talk about to me with the most pleasure is getting to develop games. And Artana gave you your first opportunity to do that on your own. So which game was that?
That was Lovelace and Babbage by Scott Almes.
And what is that game about?
So Ada Lovelace is the world's first computer programmer. So she helped Charles Babbage take his direct engine to an analytical engine, which was a pinnacle point in computer technology. So that was always going to be something I was interested in, to have a really strong female historical character. And when Scott Almes brought this game up as a potential fit for Artana, I was a huge proponent of it.
What kind of process did you go through to develop this game? Like, what was it like to do it for the first time by yourself? How much work went in? I have no idea.
A lot. So it definitely depends on the game. There are definitely games that will come into a publisher and it's been worked on for years, or maybe it was just designed, but the designer has it at a pretty stable point, and maybe at a point where it could really be brought to the public almost as is. Maybe there's some balancing to do, a little more playtesting. In this case, there were a lot of fiddly bits that came in with Lovelace and Babbage, and we had to figure out how to make a math game based in history fun. Because when you tell somebody they're about to play a game that is a math game, and potentially in this case, it ended up being also a bit of a speed game, but I'll get into why it's not really a speed game. But there is an element of that, then it can scare some people off. And when I was playtesting this, going to every con that pretty much existed for a year, showing it to people and getting experienced gamers to play, I was lucky enough to have people like Isaac Childress, Jonathan Gilmore would take time out of their day to come play this game with me, play test it, and give me feedback and help me develop it more. And then just play testing it with folks who maybe wouldn't pick up a game that is historically based or a math game. Those were my favorite people to play test it with, and families as well. Mostly, and this is a bit of a sad commentary on our society, but when I would approach couples or women and say, hey, will you come play test this? The women would invariably be like, this is great for my husband. He's an engineer. He's going to love this theme. He's going to love this game. He should play it. I'd be like, no, I want you to play test it. I need you to play test it. And they were like, oh, I don't know. It's not my forte. And I'm like, listen, woman to woman, I need someone like you who thinks they're not going to like it to sit down and tell me what you don't like about it, to tell me where it frustrates you, things that could be better, what you enjoy. So I know how to make this game better for families, for you, to play with people like your husband or other engineers or math based people who are going to enjoy it. And so, usually, pretty quickly, I could convince them that, hey, we're on the same team here. I need your help. And they would sit down and play test the game. Invariably, especially towards the end, I'd usually get from them, oh, actually, this wasn't, I was really good at this. I actually did a good job at this. This was empowering. I feel good. And I'm like, this is going the right direction. This is the way I want it to feel. Because for me, development really is about the experience that people are going to have playing a game that I'm working to bring to them, whether I'm the developer, whether I'm just working as a publisher, whether I'm doing the marketing and working on Kickstarter or distribution. No matter what my role, the point is to get a game out that is going to bring really great experiences to the gamers that are going to buy it. So that's what I'm looking for, is how do I make this the best experience it can be?
So you had a really strong interest in the historical theme of this game. How did you make
Yes.
sure that there's like a good flavor of Lovelace in the game and not just mechanical goodness?
Well, that starts with knowing your theme. So I didn't know a ton about Ada Lovelace when I started. I knew some of her story, but I didn't know she was the only legitimate child of Lord Byron. And
I just
yes,
learned that.
yes, it was amazing. And that's where the money came from. And then, of course, her mother was an amazing woman who really wanted her daughter educated, which for the time was not the norm. And so she was having Charles Babbage be her like liaison type person, right? And she had a tutor, Marie Somerville, who also just was her tutor, introduced her to Charles Babbage, helped her learn all of this science and math that helped her engage with people like Charles Babbage. But later on, she became Countess Lovelace. And so she was introduced to a lot of people in more esteemed, prestigious society. So she would have been meeting with people of the time like Charles Darwin, people who would have been going to parties and trying to get patronage for their research, because that's how things worked at the time. And she would have potentially been a patron as well, being a countess. So here she is, like having these ties to all different things that were going on in this historical period. So that's where the idea came in, that there should be patrons and she should be helping with this, analytical engine to try to help them do their research, right? So maybe you help Charles Darwin or you help some of these other historical characters that she could have potentially come into contact with. One of my absolute favorite author is Charlotte Bronte, and she was alive during that period. So she makes an appearance in the game as well, learning that and learning who overlapped, who she could potentially have seen, figuring out who is going to be the patrons, figuring out their timeline, and putting that all into the game was extremely fun. But it does limit your ability to just have carte blanche with development. I can't just take this in any direction that I want to. I mean, obviously, I'm also simultaneously involving the designer and speaking to Scott Alms and keeping him abreast of some of my crazier ideas and having him maybe temper me down and say, no, maybe we keep it a little more to the way it was and we don't change all of this. But I have to say, Scott Alms is an incredible designer for taking feedback. He loves to have that feedback and he loves the challenge. If you go to him and say, I'm running into this when I play test this at a convention, what do we do? Like, how do I make this experience not get stuck here? How do I engage people when something happens or they get stuck? And he was great about figuring things out. Okay, where do we go with this? And so there was definitely, I like to work as a team, even though I was a solo developer for this. I would never take full credit for that. I had a lot of help. I had a lot of input. And I think any good developer does, because you need to have those play testers and those people giving you feedback about how the game feels.
This actually leads to a really interesting question, which is when you think about buying a game, now there's so much difference in terms of what kind of development a game has received. Some games are releases for publishers that have received years of attention. Some games are on a timeline because even if they're with a traditional publisher, they have to come out on a schedule. And then, a lot of Kickstarters that are coming out are personal passion projects that sure were play tested, but maybe didn't have the same level of input. I guess I'm asking, to what extent is that impacting the board game industry? And is development something that designers become more open to after they've had their start? Do you just sell a design to a publisher and then maybe you get a lot of development? How does this work?
It really, really depends. And I think you can look at it from anyone's viewpoint. So say we take the designer's viewpoint. There are some designers that will come to a publisher and say, I want a really good development team. I need someone to tell me what works and what doesn't. And I need someone to tell me when to pull stuff back so that I don't put too much into this game. A really good example of that is the designer of Agra. Usually worked with a very dedicated developer that was a good friend of his, and they would work on a lot of games together. And with Agra, his developer was busy and wasn't able to help him. And the designer of Agra, in multiple interviews, and to me personally, has said, I needed him on that game. I needed somebody to say, it's too much. Take these pieces out and make do that in a different game. Keep this here. And then this is great. You did create something really wonderful, but it's too much. You put too much on, and we need to pull this off. And that's something that's really interesting about development, is you need to look at these things from all different angles. What's the player experience? But as a developer myself, having been in publishing and being who I am, I'm very frugal. So I'm always looking at margins. So I'm always going to look at a game, and I kind of alluded to this with Lovelace and Babbage. When it first came in, it had a lot of parts, tons of little gears and pieces everywhere that you were poking and moving around. And that was great. It worked. But the expense in making that game was going to make it more expensive than the game would allow. It's thinky filler. It's a, 20, 30-minute game. This isn't something that could be $50. It had to be something that was pared down in a price point to make it reasonable for the game length and the game weight, and the game audience for it. So keeping those things in mind, we had to make some changes in regards to what came in. And again, Scott Alms, hugely open to that. Loved the ideas, likes a challenge. He works in it. He's an engineer himself, so this was kind of a passion project for him anyway. But he likes that little side project where you go back to him and say, hey, here's an issue. And I've seen a lot of designers do that, say, I need a strong development team. Then I've seen passion projects that are, like you said, direct to Kickstarter, and you've got a designer who's also the developer. I've seen that go amazingly well. Obsession by Dan Halligan is a really good example of that. He did a great job of paring himself down. Some mistakes in his first print of it, he fixed them with feedback from folks in his reprint. And if you have the game, don't worry. If it's the first copy, there's all the corrections are all listed on BGG. You can find them. You're good. And you can play the game, and it improved over time. But it was great and has been great. For something that was a first-time designer and developed by the same person. But I find that's often the exception. If you're trying to do everything yourself, there's usually something you're not going to excel at. That's anybody. I couldn't be a one-person publisher and do every single piece of it, and most definitely not simultaneously. And I have experience doing all those pieces. So most people who are coming in to do that, yeah, you need help. You need to find experts for the rule book, for development, for some pieces of this. And that's where the publisher comes in to say, sure, this looks great, but we need to hit these margins. We know this about the audience, and we need this kind of pared down for whatever reasons.
How do you get into a good feedback cycle? How do you get to a point where you have a relationship with someone where you can criticize each other's ideas and say yes or no to things and keep the relationship itself strong? I feel like that's something that anybody could work on, and that
That's
Board Game Journal is
that's
a good example.
I think an example of that is knowing when to let something go. You can't necessarily fight every battle. So knowing what battles are important, where to stand and say, no, this isn't going to be something that is going to work. And we need to stop here and fix this before we move on. And knowing when to let something go and say, okay, this isn't actually a deal breaker. We can probably work around that. Clearly, you're very passionate about this piece. Let's see what we can do to keep this. And honest and complete communication in that regard, I think, is the biggest deal. There were definitely times when working with Scott Alms that I was scared to bring him some of the feedback I had, because I knew some pieces were really near and dear to his heart. And to come back and say, this isn't playing out the way that we thought it was, and we're going to have to readdress this and pull this back. And he was great about it, but it never feels good to go to somebody in their passion project, their baby, and say, oh, this isn't actually hitting the way you would think it would. But that said, I had to do the same with myself. I remember doing a fix that was supposed to fix the two-player experience of the game. And it did. It really made the two-player shine. And then I sat down and played it with 3 people, and it broke the game. It was terrible. And I was like, oh, I'm so sorry. I had to stop the play test, and I was like, I made a change and it broke it. And I am so sorry. That let's try again. And we rescheduled the play test, sat back. We were at a convention. So next day, sat back down and did a prior version of it. And then they were like, this is great. And I'm like, yeah, it's much better. So just learning accepting that, right? It's almost, the serenity prayer, right? The wisdom to know the difference between the things you can change, and then the courage that change the things you can. It's that.
Yeah, it sounds like also a willingness to eat some humble pie at a playtest occasionally.
Oh yeah, I so did. It was a big deal too. It was like a event that it was ticketed, and here I am sitting down and I was like, it's broken. I'm so sorry. We should stop now. I was a bit red in the face. They were super sweet about it, really lovely. And, of course I made it up to them and made a big deal about the next, play test of it and them seeing the game. But yeah, that happens.
So in terms of your gaming taste, and you and I are similar in that I would say that we're both omni gamers, but our tastes trend heavy a lot of the time. What's the difference in development between a heavy game and a light game? Are they fundamentally different experiences?
It really depends on the mechanisms involved and who I'm going to be sitting down to play test with. So the heavier the game, I might actually piece out some of the play testing I'm doing with that and tell people I'm going to give an overview and we're going to focus on this, the beginning of the game, or we're going to jump into the middle of the game. The problems I've run into with heavier game development is it's hard to find the breadth of audience that will sit down to play test a game that is exceedingly long. And we're talking something that's going to take 4 to 6 hours to play. Now, the number of people who are going to fully play test that and give it its due diligence throughout becomes problematic. And I need to make sure, because I'm doing blind play testing a lot, I need to make sure that they're actually playing all the way through, that there's not distractions, that there's not issues in the middle of the game where I'm not getting feedback that I need. And when I say blind play test, that means I'm not present.
Right.
or I'm present and they don't know it, or, there's some way. COVID's helped with that because I can be in the God seat of like tabletop simulator or something, and they just don't know that I'm watching. But I don't want to influence their play. I don't want them to be saying to me, this game is great because I'm me and I'm happy. And and they're like, oh, I can't hurt Jess's feelings. No, I need them to be brutally honest, and I can take it. Some of the games I've developed, I've actually taken to MIT here in Boston because they have a board game society that meets regularly. And
Nice.
they're very willing to sit down and look at a game. And at first, when I would first go, they would be very cautious. And I would have to sit down at the table and say, please break my game. Break it, ruin it, like destroy it. The best thing you can do for me is tell me my math is all wrong, that this is completely unbalanced, and that I have to go fix X, Y, and Z. That is what I want out of this play test. Do not tell me at the end, oh, it's great, because I'm going to cry. And once I kind of flipped it on its head that I'm going to cry if you tell me it's good, then they were like, okay, all right, let's roll up our sleeves and do this. And with Lovelace and Babbage being a math game, every game in some degree is a math game, every game. But when you're relying on math the way that Lovelace and Babbage does, I had to ensure that those cards that you're getting at the beginning are balanced, that everybody had choices for what they were going to go after for their little support that they can use each round. They needed to each have a valid chance to get to that in a certain number of turns. That's some equations, right? I
Yeah.
had to go back to my honors classes that I did, and I'm like, all right, what was this? I remember my teacher telling me this. How do I do this again? I always thought I could just look this up. I don't know. Didn't think I was going to need it for board games. But going to MIT and having them break it and having them show me where it was lopsided helped me figure that out and come up with the equations I needed. Luckily for me, I love that. I love researching stuff like that. I love doing the history and I love figuring out where math is broken. And honestly, I don't know whether that's chicken or the egg. I think I was like that before, but as far as being an omni gamer, now I gravitate to games that I see that have that. I don't care if they're heavy. I don't care if they're thinky filler. I don't care if they're medium weight. The weight is not what I'm going for. What I'm going for is perfect development, seeing all of those pieces work together like magic and knowing that somebody balanced this all out and figured this out behind the scenes, which I get that most gamers aren't going to understand how that interplay is working. But what they are going to understand is that was a lot of fun. And I had a lot of choices I could make. And I didn't feel like I was blocked out. I could go this path to victory or this path to victory. And somehow those worked on a good level. Like if I made mistakes, I wasn't going to win, of course. Like it's still strategy of decision making, but I had options and it felt good. And that's the math behind it and the equations and the playtesting, and seeing that come together for me now playing a game is just awesome.
That is awesome. So you do a lot of work now for Ion Game Design, which means that you are working a lot with games that have a large historical component, a research component. How does that impact the development of a game?
It really depends on the game, and it depends on the designer. So Galenis by HP Kusela he is an expert in that area of history for early ancient Roman medicine that kind of spawned our medicine that is practiced today, but was an early edition of that. And he had so much knowledge that it was really more just seeing how the gameplay felt and giving him feedback about mechanisms and how it felt to be playing the game and if that was creating the experience that he wanted, because he had that expertise. Then there's games like Ewan Manker did Pax Viking, and he had that familial history and heredity to the Vikings. So he had, again, done a lot of research with that. But he was really open to other people doing some research or reading some things or finding even in the art some different ways of handling it. And he loved going and diving into that and was really open to people helping collaborate with that history. And that was super interesting and fun to do. And now we're coming up with Shamaramet, which Basime is going to be designing. And that's really in the early stages of the design process. So watching her go through something that, again, that's part of her familial history. She's heard the stories of this, Assyrian regent for her entire life from her family and her father. And so now she gets to really dig into the history of it, determine what was lore and what is real, and piece that together in a way that that's going to work for a game design. And she's really relying on us to give her insight into what we'd like to see for that. How do we want that to play out? So yeah, it really does depend on your team and what you're doing. I feel like everything is a different adventure. I think that's really what I love about it.
Have there been moments in the development of a game where you have to choose between a mechanism that is fun and a historical accuracy issue?
Yes. Yes, there have definitely been times where you want to go in a certain direction. So, for example, with Lovelace and Babbage, I will fully admit that it is barely an analytical engine. It is not really that, but we did our best to mimic that in it. It's the direct engine, but we're going in and using that and then adding in the fact that you're grabbing the patrons and you have these little cards that you can get that kind of are your little programs that help you. That makes it a little more of that. So we had to add that. So it definitely pushed the direction of it in order to make it a Lovelace themed game. So those are things where definitely had to take it in that direction. There were ways that we could have changed the gameplay to maybe make it more fun, but it was going to really pull away from that theme making sense. And that happens a lot at IM Game Design as well, that okay, we know we want bugs in this game, but how do we make bugs work in this game? What are they going to do? What mechanism is that going to work and look like? And sometimes compromises have to be made for what it was existed at that time. And then sometimes there are exceptions made, like debugging is a thing in Lovelace and Babbage. We needed that as a way for if someone just really made a mistake with their math and it ruins their program in a round, it gave them an ability to recover. And it really works in the game, but debugging didn't exist until a little later. It still existed though, and it's very interesting historically. So that's just a piece of the rule book where we decided to call it out and say, okay, this came about during this time period, but it really was because there were bugs in the machine and they had to clean out the bugs. It was literally debugging. So yes, this is where that came from. So sometimes you can use a little bit of artistic license, and then other times, that it would just detracts from the experience and the theme, especially for those people who see a theme and really gravitate to it and want an authentic experience.
Ooh, that's rough. Yeah, you talk about balancing a lot of different aspects, actually. So staying true to theme, making sure the mechanisms are fun, and also remaining financially on target.
Yes.
How would you recommend that newer designers or developers approach that early on so that they don't end up having to debug something they really don't want to?
Learn from others. Really, really do your research. There are plenty of people out there who love to write about their experiences and provide information about what they've gone through. And if you can't find something that directly applies to what you're doing, ask somebody. Likely there's a game out there. We're not getting a lot of brand new mechanisms these days. It could happen, and it does happen on occasion, but you can point to some of the newer things, like the tech tree was huge, right? Like that we had that. And different mechanisms like that aren't a dime a dozen coming up constantly. So if you're utilizing a mechanism that somebody's an expert in, talk to that person. Say, hey, can you take a look at this? I've designed a game. I'd love to get your feedback on it, see what you think about it. And in my experience, when I was going to cons, and like I said, I'm walking up to Isaac Childress, I'm walking up to Jonathan Gilmour, I'm walking up to Tom Lehman, Fel Barrows, who does development work for CMON, many people. And they were just like, absolutely, I will sit down and play this game with you. And then they would tell their designer friends, hey, you got to go take a look at Jess's game. Go see what you think. Give her some feedback. I know you'd have some insight on this. So people are willing to help other people in this hobby. This is still very much a niche hobby. And board games succeed when board games succeed. If you're going about this to be competitive or to edge out somebody, this isn't the industry for you. This is, the more board games we can get out to people, the more board games they're going to want to play, especially the better they are. So it only makes sense to help each other and provide that feedback. And I've always found this community to be extremely generous with their time and their feedback with these things. And then, I've been asked in return, hey, well, can you join my playtest group, or can you take a look at my game? And yeah, we'll just sit down and play everybody's prototype and get feedback and provide that. And that's fun too.
That's so nice. You said something that leads to yet another question. This is my way, I guess. I thought it was really interesting that you're talking about mechanisms and their originality. I think that a lot of people feel pressure when they're creating something to make sure that they're different.
Yes.
Everybody's inspired by somebody great, but they are afraid to be too much like them. How do you balance between the push for originality and having your own thing versus going with things that work, because that also really, really matters in terms of game design. It doesn't matter how novel something is if it doesn't function.
I mean, yes, everything does have to have some unique feel, right? Because otherwise, why wouldn't I buy this other established game that's now on sale because it was designed and published 3 years ago? So it needs to be different, and you need to be not ripping off somebody's intellectual property. So clearly things have to change and evolve. But one of the things, and I'm going to be, so designers out there, you're going to hate me a little bit, but every publisher knows when you come in saying it's unique and it's never been done before, mostly we're shutting down the second you say that, because it's just so unlikely. It's just not likely. It's possible, but you have to understand that we're hearing that day in and day out. Don't go with that. Just go with, I'm really excited about this, and I can't wait to show you how much fun it is to play my game. Go with that. Then I'm in. Then I'm like, really? Okay, great. Let's play. Let me see how fun this is. So create a fun gaming experience. Create a game you want to play. And then, sure, should it be different? Think about the mechanisms you're pulling together. Try to be unique. Try to come up with, hey, I know that this has been done this way before and this done this way, but has anybody ever done them together? Let's see what we can do here. What happens when I do this? And be open to input from others who are playtesting your game, or from publishers giving you insight into your game, or developers if you end up with a team of people helping you develop your game. Be open to that. Realize that any criticism that you're being given is an opportunity to find something better about your game. And don't take it as an insult or, hey, but I've worked on this so many hours. You have. And that actually might put blinders on you. That may mean that you're the worst person to tell me about your game. So listen to what people who are just seeing your game for the first time say. And I know that's hard. I know sometimes, especially with a published game, designers get the thread on BGG that's, I played your game half a time and I think that you should have That's difficult. Don't do that either. Like, we could take this in either direction. Maybe at least give them 6 plays of the game before you completely tell them how they should have designed it differently. Because I guarantee you they probably played it more than half a time. So you might want to just give it a little bit of longevity. So there's balance there. But the idea of creating something unique, create something fun, create something that is a theme you enjoy, that hasn't been done before, that maybe means something to you. Create something with mechanisms that work together in a unique way. But don't worry so much about being the first one to create sliced bread. We've all had sliced bread. There's not many other ways to slice it. So just try to create something really, really fun.
That makes sense. It makes a lot of sense. So we've talked a lot about criticism in this conversation, and I actually find that interesting when I'm talking to you because we play very different roles in the industry. I've never designed a game, but I sure as heck feel justified giving them a score and writing about their merits or lack thereof. So
Right.
one thing I've always wondered about, so I don't really like to play test and I don't like to comment on generally on Kickstarters or games that are kind of still in development because I feel bad about like going at something that I know is still being developed. But then I also wonder, so my reviews are really written for the consumer. It's really should a person who's buying games, do you want this? But do reviews play any role in the publishing cycle? Like, do y'all read criticism of games and then it does it affect the next game? I've always wondered. I don't know if I could read a review of my own stuff because I'd be embarrassed.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, maybe that's different, but from what I've seen, yeah, we're all looking for coverage. Any coverage that's out there, usually it's being read and reread and shared by the team. That is something that we're really interested in receiving. So for multiple reasons, whether it's to do better, to ensure that the game is intuitive. What if the reviewer got something wrong and we're like, wait, no, actually, it's just if you play it this way. And granted, that may be because the rule book didn't explain it right. There can be reasons for that. But that criticism is taken to heart, maybe sometimes too much so. And I'll get off on a little bit of a tangent of reviewers. I review games, so I feel like I have a right to say this, but I'm also, international marketing director for a number of publishers. And as such, I engage a lot of media to review and preview games. The folks whose opinions I value are the ones who are fair, honest, and thorough, to steal the tagline of some show that does reviews. I don't know. But yeah, I want you to give your feedback of the game. I think all publishers should want you to give fair and honest feedback of the game. Why? Because I don't want people who aren't going to enjoy the game to buy the game. I want people to have fun. That's why I make board games. I'm not making it for the millions of dollars because those don't exist in this hobby. So what I'm doing is trying to create fun experiences. And that means your review helps me ensure that the people who are going to like this game buy the game. If you're just saying this game's for everyone, it's amazing, no one's going to hate it, everyone should buy a copy, I'm not going to like that much, because that's going to lead to my BGG score plummeting as people who hate deck builders buy copies of my game and play it and say, I hate deck builders. And I'm like, but it says deck builder. Like, why did you buy it? And then they're like, but this review said it was great. It is for people who like deck builders. Like, don't buy it if you don't like a deck builder. So I want that honest criticism. But what I don't want is a reviewer who thinks they're omnipotent. You don't know what everyone is going to think about a game.
Honestly, yes, I do. No joking. I'm joking.
We've talked about this, right? Yeah. There are games I really don't enjoy. I don't like playing. But I am never going to tell the world unilaterally that this game should be burned in a dumpster fire. No, because there are people who are going to enjoy this game. I know that. At least the designer liked it. His family probably played it 500 times. Like, someone likes this game. So for me to decide that my opinion of this game is the only one that matters and no one should buy it. No, that's just as bad as saying this game is for absolutely everyone and everyone should buy it. So be critical. That's your role. That's your job, is to say, hey, I really like this game, but the rule book's terrible. They need to get a rule book writer. Or I love this game, but it needs player aids because I had to keep going back and looking things up, and that really pulled me out of the theme and I wanted to enjoy it more. Or I honestly wish this game were longer. It feels like it ends too quickly and I enjoyed what it was doing. And if they could just fix this part of it, I'd really get more out of it. That's all really valuable feedback. And some publishers, some designers will look at that and say, hey, I can fix that for the reprint. I've seen that happen. I've seen reprints come out with corrections and logs go up on BGG saying, we found this to be a better way to play the game. Here's how you fix your version if you have the first printing of it. And now you can play it this other way. And I've seen credit given to reviewers for such things. So yeah, just be critical, be real, give the honest feedback is my recommendation. And those are the folks I utilize for reviews and for marketing.
So, as we wind down, I'm going to ask you a question that's just about our love for the hobby. What game is so beautifully developed that you wish you'd done it yourself?
Ginkopolis. That's my favorite game of all time. And I cannot get over how perfectly developed that game is, how the cards come out, and how it works together at the end. It amazes me every single time I play it, how just perfectly developed it is. And I even have criticisms of it. It's hard to get to the table. It's hard to teach to new gamers who aren't experienced in a number of different mechanisms because of the way those mechanisms work together. It's hard for newer gamers to understand the card drafting. And so it's not even my top rated game. It doesn't get the top score for me, but it's still just carte blanche, a joy to play every single time for me because I get giddy excited at the fact of how the tableau works when you're card drafting and building and how the new cards come into the deck. Every time that happens, I'm just like, oh, it's so perfect. It's so good. Because they used everything. There's no waste. It's like an IKEA board game. And I love it.
That said, there also does need to be a board game about being the person who could find everything in the warehouse at IKEA.
IKEA, yes, and you get stuck in it. Well, it could totally be based on. There's an Essen board game if you've ever played this, and you have to bring your haul back to your car and like manage your money, and it's like you're at Essen. And I have that game, and again, just because. Come on, that's unique, right? Like I can play like I'm at Essen. There's actually 2 Essen board games. The later one's better. But I would love that. That would be the same theme, like how you get everything in your bag and how you check out. Did you remember your bag today? Because you get money back if you do.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
We need an IKEA game. This would totally work. That is totally a theme.
I love it. All right. So how can people find you online if they want to connect?
I am Board Game Girl across all social media, Board Game _girl1 on Twitter, but BGG as well, Board Game Girl. That's usually where you can find me. You can also find me on Dino Stampede, which is entering season 2 over on the Heavy Cardboard channel. And often I'm hanging out over on Heavy Cardboard, either streaming games or on the podcast there as well.
Fantastic. And those of you who watch, you can find me anywhere as Beyond Solitaire. Thank you so much for coming on, Jess. It's been great to talk to you.
Thanks for having me. This was awesome.
So anybody who's out there, hope you enjoyed this. Leave us a comment, ask us a question, and most of all, happy gaming.